The hospital room was filled with the soft hum of machines and the gentle whispers of exhausted joy. Sarah clutched her husband Michael's hand as she gazed down at the 3 tiny miracles resting on her chest. Triplets. After 7 years of trying, 7 years of heartbreak and empty promises, God had finally answered their prayers in the most extraordinary way. "We did it, Michael," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. Tears streamed down her face, but these weren't tears of pain anymore. These were tears of pure, overwhelming love. "Our miracle babies are finally here." Michael's eyes were wet too as he gently touched each tiny head. "Emma, Grace, and little David," he said softly, "our perfect family." But even in that sacred moment, Sarah noticed something that made her stomach twist slightly. Michael's mother, Patricia, stood in the corner with her 2 daughters, whispering among themselves. Their smiles seemed forced, their congratulations hollow. Patricia approached the bed with what looked like practiced warmth. "Oh, Sarah, they're beautiful," Patricia said, but her voice carried an odd tone. 3 children at once. That's quite a burden." Sarah chose to ignore the word burden. She was too happy, too overwhelmed with love, to let anything dim this moment. Michael squeezed her hand reassuringly. "They're blessings, Mom, not burdens," Michael said firmly. Over the next few weeks, the family seemed supportive enough. Patricia and her daughters, Linda and Rebecca, brought meals and offered help. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She catch them whispering and staring at her with eyes that held secrets. When they held the babies, it felt performative, like they were playing roles in a script she hadn't read. "You're overthinking," Michael would say when she mentioned it. "They're just adjusting. 3 babies is a lot for everyone." Sarah wanted to believe him. She desperately wanted to believe him. Life with triplets was beautiful chaos. Sarah barely slept, barely ate, barely had a moment to breathe, but she had never been happier. Michael was an incredible father, waking up for night feedings, changing diapers, singing lullabies. Their little apartment felt like heaven on earth, filled with baby giggles and the sweet scent of innocence. But heaven, as Sarah would learn, can disappear in an instant. It was a Tuesday morning, exactly 4 months after the triplets were born. Michael had left early for work, kissing each baby goodbye and promising Sarah he'd pick up groceries on the way home. It was supposed to be an ordinary day. The phone rang at 2:47 p.m. Sarah remembered the exact time because she was feeding Grace when the world stopped spinning. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Dr. Martinez from City General Hospital. I need you to come immediately. There's been an accident." The phone slipped from Sarah's hand. The room spun. Grace continued nursing, innocent and unaware that everything was about to change forever. Michael never made it to the grocery store. A drunk driver had run a red light, hitting Michael's car head-on. He died instantly, the doctor said. No pain, no suffering. But for Sarah, the pain was just beginning. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and hollow sympathy. Sarah sat in front row, holding baby David while Emma and Grace slept in their carriers beside her. She felt like she was watching someone else's life, like this couldn't possibly be her reality. But it was Patricia's behavior that truly shattered her. Instead of offering comfort, Patricia whispered accusations to anyone who would listen. Sarah caught fragmented conversations that made her blood run cold. She always brought him bad luck, Patricia hissed to her sister. Nothing good ever happened to our Michael until he met her. 3 babies at once? That's not natural, Linda added. My grandmother always said multiple births were a sign. A sign of what? Someone asked. Misfortune. Curse. Some women just carried darkness with them. Sarah felt like she was drowning in their hatred. How could they blame her for something so random, so tragic? How could they look at these innocent babies and see anything but love? The worst was yet to come. After the funeral, Patricia approached Sarah with cold, calculating eyes. We need to talk about the house. What about it? Sarah asked, confusion mixing with her grief. It belongs to the Thompson family. Always has. Michael may have lived there with you, but it was never really yours. Sarah's heart pounded. Patricia, what are you saying? I'm saying you and those children need to find somewhere else to live. We're selling the house. But the babies, they're Thompson's too. They're Michael's children. Patricia's laugh was bitter and cruel. Are they? Can you prove that? Multiple births like that. It makes people wonder. The accusation hit Sarah like a physical blow. How dare you suggest? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you to leave. You have 1 week. That week passed in a nightmarish haze. Sarah frantically called relatives, old friends, anyone who might help. But doors closed in her face one by one. The whispers had spread through their small town like poison. She's cursed. Bad things happen around her. Those babies, there's something unnatural about them. Sarah sold her jewelry, her furniture, anything of value just to afford a cheap motel room. But even that money ran out quickly. And then came that night, the night that would be burned into Sarah's memory forever. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the world into a gray, cold blur. Sarah had managed to find temporary shelter in an abandoned shed behind an old warehouse. It wasn't much, but it kept the babies dry. She was trying to warm a bottle of formula with a small camping stove when she heard the footsteps. Patricia appeared in the doorway with Linda and Rebecca behind her. In the dim light, they looked like vengeful spirits. "Time's up," Patricia said coldly. "Please," Sarah begged, clutching baby Emma to her chest while the other two slept in their makeshift cribs. "It's pouring rain. They're just babies. They'll get sick. Should have thought of that before you brought your curse into our family." They started grabbing Sarah's few remaining possessions, throwing them into the mud outside. Sarah watched in horror as her baby's clothes, their blankets, their bottles were tossed into puddles like garbage. "Stop. Please stop." Sarah screamed, but her voice was lost in the storm. Patricia grabbed the car seats with Grace, and David still sleeping inside. "They're coming with us. They're Thompson blood. Even if they are cursed, we'll find them proper homes." "No!" Sarah's scream tore through the night. She lunged forward, still holding Emma, her feet slipping in the mud. "You can't take them. They're mine. I'm their mother." The struggle was brief but vicious. Sarah fell hard, Emma crying in her arms. Patricia and her daughters managed to get Grace and David to their car. "Please." Sarah sobbed, crawling through the mud and rain. "Don't separate us. They need me. I'm all they have." Patricia looked down at her with disgust. "You're nothing. You have nothing. And now you have nothing left to give them." The car doors slammed shut. Through the rain-streaked windows, Sarah could see her babies crying, their little hands pressed against the glass. The engine started. "Wait!" Sarah screamed, running after the car, still clutching Emma. "Please. They're just babies. They need their mother." But the taillights disappeared into the storm, taking half of Sarah's heart with them. Sarah collapsed in the mud, holding Emma close to her chest, both of them soaked and shivering. Emma's cries mixed with the thunder, and Sarah realized she was making sounds too primal, broken sounds that came from the deepest part of her soul. She had lost her husband. She had lost her home. She had lost 2 of her children. All she had left was Emma, and a future that looked darker than the storm-filled night. But what none of them knew, not Patricia with her cruel heart, not Linda with her whispered poison, not Rebecca with her silent approval of cruelty, was that Sarah carried a secret so powerful it could change everything, a secret that would turn the story of betrayal into something else entirely, a secret worth $450 million. But that night, as Sarah held her remaining child under a leaking shed roof, that secret felt as distant and impossible as the stars hidden behind the storm clouds. Before we continue with Sarah's journey from that dark night to the dawn that was coming, I need you to do something. If you believe that no mother should ever be treated this way, if your heart is breaking for Sarah and little Emma shivering in that storm, then hit that subscribe button right now. It costs you absolutely nothing, but it tells us something powerful. It tells us you stand with her. Don't just watch your story unfold. Be part of it, because what happens next will restore your faith in justice, but only if you're truly invested in seeing it through. Sarah's story is just beginning. The family that threw her out into the storm has no idea what's coming. They think they've won, but they've actually awakened something they never saw coming. Subscribe now, because you won't want to miss what happens when a broken woman they discarded discovers the power that was always hers. The abandoned shed became Sarah's world. For 3 weeks, she and Emma lived in a space barely larger than a closet, with a roof that leaked in 7 different places and walls that seemed to breathe with the wind. Every morning, Sarah would wake to find new puddles on the floor, and every night, she would rearrange their meager belongings to avoid the worst of the water damage. Emma was getting thinner. Sarah could see it in her tiny face, feel it when she held her. The baby's cries had become weaker, more desperate, and Sarah knew with a mother's intuition that time was running out. But the worst part wasn't the cold, or the hunger, or even the constant fear. The worst part was the silence where Grace's and David's laughter should have been. Sarah would wake up reaching for them, her arms empty, her heart breaking all over again every single morning. She had tried everything. Every door she knocked on in town closed before she could finish explaining her situation. Old friends she'd known since childhood would see her coming, and suddenly remember urgent appointments. Former co-workers avoided eye contact at the grocery store. The whispers followed her everywhere. There she is. She heard a woman say at the pharmacy when Sarah was trying to buy formula with her last $5. The curse one. I heard she drove her own husband to his death. And those babies, another voice added, unnatural, having 3 at once. My grandmother always said. Sarah grabbed the formula and fled. Emma crying in her arms, both of them soaked from the rain that never seemed to stop in this town anymore. Mrs. Henderson, who had been like a grandmother to Sarah growing up, was her last hope. Sarah approached the familiar yellow house where she'd spent countless afternoons as a child, where Mrs. Henderson had taught her to bake cookies and told her stories about princesses who overcame impossible odds. Sarah knocked on the door, Emma bundled in the one clean blanket they had left. When Mrs. Henderson opened the door, Sarah saw recognition flash in her eyes, followed immediately by something that looked like fear. Sarah, dear. Mrs. Henderson's voice was different now, distant. I heard about. I'm so sorry for your loss. Mrs. Henderson, please. I just need somewhere warm for Emma. Just for one night. You know me. You've known me since I was 7 years old. The older woman's eyes darted nervously to the street, as if she was afraid of being seen with Sarah. I wish I could help, dear, but my daughter, she's very superstitious, and with everything people are saying. What are they saying? Sarah's voice cracked. That tragedy follows you, that you're marked somehow. I don't believe it, of course, but... Mrs. Henderson's voice trailed off as she slowly closed the door. I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm so very sorry. That night, as Sarah held Emma in the broken shed, listening to her daughter's weak cries of hunger, she found herself talking to the darkness. Michael, if you can hear me, I don't know what to do anymore. They took Grace and David, and I don't even know if they're safe. Emma is so hungry, and I'm failing her. I'm failing all of them. The rain drummed against the metal roof, like an endless funeral march. Sarah closed her eyes and remembered her wedding day, how Michael had promised to love and protect her forever. How could forever end so suddenly? How could love turn into such cruelty? By the 4th week, Sarah had sold everything she owned except the clothes on her back and Emma's few remaining baby items. Her wedding ring, the beautiful diamond solitaire that Michael had saved for months to buy, was the last thing to go. The pawn shop owner barely looked up from his newspaper when Sarah placed the ring on the counter. $50, he said, without even examining it. 50? Sarah's heart sank. But it cost over $2,000. It's real diamond. I have the certificate. Lady, I got a dozen rings just like this one. Take it or leave it. Sarah took it. $50 meant formula for Emma, maybe a few days in a real motel. It meant survival, even if it cost her the last symbol of the love she'd lost. Walking back to the shed that night, carrying a bag of baby supplies and a small umbrella she'd found discarded in a trash bin, Sarah noticed a figure hunched against the wall of the old warehouse. An elderly homeless man, soaked through and shivering. Without thinking, Sarah approached him. Sir, are you okay? He looked up with cloudy eyes and a face weathered by years of hard living. Just trying to stay dry, miss. Not having much luck. Sarah looked at the umbrella in her hand. It wasn't much, but it was something. She held it out to him. Here, take this. The man stared at her like she'd offered him gold. You sure? You got a baby there. You need it more than me. We have shelter, Sarah lied smoothly. You don't. Please take it. As the old man accepted the umbrella with tears in his eyes, Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time in weeks, she had helped someone instead of begging for help. It was a tiny flame of dignity in an ocean of despair. Bless you, child, the old man said. Bless you and your little one. That night, as Sarah held Emma in the shed, she found herself thinking about her father. James Morrison had been a complicated man, successful in business, but often absent from her childhood. He died when Sarah was 16, leaving behind memories of a man who worked too much and loved too quietly. But she remembered something he used to say during his rare moments of tenderness. Sarah, my dear, everything I work for, everything I build, it's all for you. One day, when you need it most, you'll understand that you're never as powerless as you think. At the time, she thought he was just being dramatic. Her father had been good with money, owned some properties, had investments, but nothing extraordinary. After his death, her mother had handled the estate, and Sarah had received a modest inheritance that she'd use for college. Nothing life-changing. But lying in that cold shed, holding her hungry daughter, Sarah found herself wondering about her father's words. What had he meant? What was she supposed to understand? The wondering was interrupted by Emma's cries. The baby was burning with fever, her tiny body hot against Sarah's chest. Sarah's blood turned to ice. She had no money for a doctor, no insurance, no way to help her daughter. She ran through the rain to the nearest hospital. Emma bundled in her arms, both of them soaked before they made it 2 blocks. The emergency room was bright and warm, filled with the antiseptic smell of hope and healing. "Please," Sarah begged the nurse at the intake desk. "My daughter has a fever. She won't stop crying. Something's wrong." The nurse took one look at Sarah, muddy, exhausted, clearly homeless, and her expression hardened. "Do you have insurance? Identification? Can you prove this child is yours?" Sarah's heart stopped. "Prove she's mine? She's my daughter. I'm her mother. We need documentation. Birth certificate, insurance cards, something official. They're there at home. I can bring them tomorrow." The nurse's eyes narrowed. "Ma'am, if you can't provide proper documentation and payment method, we can't treat the child. However, if you're concerned about neglect or abuse, we can call social services." The threat was clear. Sarah clutched Emma tighter, her mind racing. If social services got involved, they might take Emma away, just like Patricia had taken Grace and David. She couldn't risk it. "No," Sarah whispered. "No, it's okay. The fever's breaking. We're fine." But they weren't fine. As Sarah walked back into the rain, Emma's cries echoing through the night, she felt the weight of complete hopelessness settling over her like a burial shroud. Back in the shed, Sarah tried everything she could think of to bring down Emma's fever. She used the last of their clean water to make cool compresses, sang lullabies until her voice was hoarse, prayed to a God who seemed to have forgotten they existed. Around midnight, Emma's fever finally broke. The baby fell into an exhausted sleep, her breathing steady and peaceful for the first time in hours. Sarah held her close, her own body shaking with relief and exhaustion. "I won't let them break us," she whispered to her sleeping daughter. "I don't know how, but I'll find a way. You're going to grow up knowing you're loved, knowing you're worthy of good things. This isn't our ending, baby girl. This is just the hardest part of our beginning." Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the old world and preparing the ground for something new to grow. And in a law office across the town, a lawyer named Robertson was working late into the night, searching through old files and trying to track down a woman named Sarah Morrison Thompson. He'd been searching for her for months, following a trail that had gone cold until a recent address update from the hospital had given him new hope. He had news that would change her life forever. But first, he had to find her. What Sarah didn't realize as she held Emma in that broken shed was that her father's promise was still alive. His love had been building interest and growing stronger for years, waiting for the moment when she would need it most. And that moment was coming. But if your heart is breaking right now, watching Sarah fight for survival with baby Emma, if you're feeling the injustice of how the world has treated this mother who lost everything, then pause for just a second and subscribe to this channel. It's free, and it helps us share more real-life inspired stories like this one. Don't just leave Sarah and Emma out in that rain alone. Walk this journey with them. Because what you don't know yet is that this story of loss is about to become something extraordinary. Sarah thinks she's at her lowest point, but she's actually on the verge of discovering a power she never knew she had. The family that threw her out believes they've won, but they have no idea what's coming for them. Subscribe right now, because the next part of the story will shock you. You won't believe what Sarah finds out about herself, and you definitely won't want to miss what happens when she discovers a truth that's been waiting for her all along. The morning that changed everything started like all the others. Sarah woke to the sound of rain on the metal roof and Emma's soft whimpering. It had been 2 months since that terrible night when Patricia had torn her family apart. 2 months of surviving on scraps and prayers. 2 months of watching her daughter grow thinner despite Sarah's desperate efforts. Sarah was heating the last bottle of formula on her camping stove when she heard footsteps outside the shed. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Had Patricia found them? Were they coming to take Emma too? A gentle knock echoed through the small space. "Miss Thompson? Sarah Morrison Thompson?" The voice was unfamiliar, professional but kind. Sarah clutched Emma closer and approached the door cautiously. "Who's asking?" "My name is Robertson. I'm an attorney with Morrison, Willis & Associates. I've been looking for you for quite some time. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Morrison, that was her maiden name, her father's name. What could a lawyer possibly want with her now? Had she somehow broken the law by being homeless? Were they here to take Emma because of her living conditions? Through a crack in the door, she could see a well-dressed Asian man in his 50s, holding a briefcase and an umbrella. His expression was concerned, but gentle. I don't understand. What do you want? Miss Thompson, I have some very important information about your father's estate. May I come in? What I have to tell you is quite significant. Sarah's mind raced. Her father's estate had been settled years ago. Her mother had handled everything, given her a small inheritance that had long since been spent on college and her wedding. What could possibly be left to discuss? Reluctantly, she opened the door wider. Robertson stepped inside, his expensive shoes squelching in the mud that had become a permanent fixture of their shelter. His eyes took in their living conditions with a mixture of shock and compassion. Miss Thompson, I had no idea you were living in such circumstances. I've been trying to locate you through your last known address, but... Just tell me what you want, Sarah interrupted, too tired and scared for pleasantries. Are you here to take my daughter? Because I'm telling you right now, I won't let that happen. Robert's expression softened. I'm not here to take anything from you. I'm here to give you something. Something that should have been yours years ago. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. Your father, James Morrison, was a very wealthy man, much wealthier than anyone knew, including your mother. Sarah stared at him blankly. That's impossible. My father was comfortable, but he wasn't rich. He owned a small consulting business, had some investments. On the surface, yes, but your father was also a very private man who kept his most significant assets separate from his day-to-day life. He had offshore accounts, international investments, real estate holdings across 3 countries. He built an empire quietly, methodically, over decades. The words weren't making sense. Sarah felt like she was listening to someone describe a stranger. No, you're wrong. My mother would have known. She handled his estate. I received my inheritance. It was enough for college, nothing more. Robert's face grew grave. Miss Thompson, your mother never knew about these assets. Your father kept them completely separate, with instructions that they were only to be revealed to you under specific circumstances. What circumstances? When you turned 30, got married, or... Robert paused, looking at Emma sleeping in Sarah's arms. When you became a mother, Sarah's knees went weak. She sank onto the wooden crate that served as their only chair. I don't understand. I've been 31 for 6 months. I was married for 3 years. I've been a mother for 5 months. Where has this information been? Your father's instructions were very specific. The revelation was to come only when you truly needed it, when life had tested you and proven your character. He wanted you to know struggle, to understand the value of what he was giving you. Robert reached into the folder and pulled out a sealed envelope with Sarah's name written in her father's familiar handwriting. He left you a letter. Sarah's hands shook as she took the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in the careful script she remembered from birthday cards and school notes. My dear Sarah, she read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. If you're reading this, it means life has brought you to your knees, and you found the strength to keep fighting anyway. I know I wasn't always the father you deserved. I worked too much, worried too much, loved too quietly. But everything I did, every sacrifice I made, was for this moment. You are stronger than you know, more capable than you believe, and more deserving than anyone has ever told you. The world will try to break you, but you carry something inside that can't be broken. You carry my love, your mother's heart, and a strength that is entirely your own. I've left you everything, Sarah. Not just money, but the tools to build whatever life you choose. Use it wisely. Use it boldly. Use it to show the world what a Morrison woman can do when she sets her mind to it. You are never as powerless as you think. Remember that always. With all my love and faith in you, Dad. P.S. Take care of those babies. Something tells me they're going to change the world. Sarah's tears fell onto the paper, smudging the ink slightly. He knew about the triplets. But how could he know? He died years before I even met Michael. Robert smiled. Your father was a man who planned for every possibility. He always believed you'd have children, and he wanted to make sure they'd never want for anything. How much? Sarah whispered. How much did he leave? Robert pulled out a detailed financial statement. The current value of all assets, after 15 years of careful management and investment growth, is $450 million. The number hung in the air like something impossible. Sarah stared at Robert, waiting for him to laugh, to tell her this was some kind of cruel joke. When he didn't, she started laughing herself, a broken, hysterical sound that scared Emma into crying. $450 million, she repeated, still laughing through her tears. Do you see me, Mr. Chen? Do you see where I'm living? Do I look like someone worth even $1, let alone $450 million? You look like someone who has survived the unthinkable, Robert said firmly. You look like someone who held on to her child when the world tried to take everything from her. You look like exactly the kind of person your father hoped you would become. Sarah stood up abruptly, pacing the small space. This is insane. This is absolutely insane. You're telling me that while I've been living in a shed, while I've been begging for scraps, while I've been watching my daughter waste away, I've been worth nearly $500 million. The money has been accumulating, waiting for you. Your father's lawyers, my law firm, have been managing it according to his wishes. We've been looking for you since your 30th birthday, but you moved so many times after your husband's death. Sarah's laughter turned to anger. Looking for me? I've been living in this town my entire life. How hard could it be to find someone? You'd be surprised. After your husband died, you seemed to disappear from all official records. No fixed address, no employment records, no insurance claims. It was as if you'd vanished entirely. The reality of her situation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had vanished. Patricia and her family had systematically erased her from existence, cut her off from every connection, every resource, every avenue of help. They had isolated her so completely that even lawyers with unlimited resources couldn't find her. They did this, she whispered. Patricia and her family. They made sure I had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. They wanted me to disappear. Robert's expression darkened. Who is Patricia? Sarah told him everything. About the funeral accusations, the forced eviction, the night they took Grace and David, the months of cruel rejection from people who had once called themselves friends. With each detail, Robert's face grew more serious. Ms. Thompson, what they did to you was illegal on multiple counts. We're talking about theft, kidnapping, fraud, possibly more. With your resources, we can not only get your children back, but we can ensure that justice is served. Sarah looked down at Emma, who had fallen asleep again in her arms. For months, she had felt powerless, voiceless, forgotten. Now, with a single conversation, everything had changed, but with the revelation came a flood of conflicting emotions. Relief, yes, but also rage so pure it took her breath away. All this suffering had been unnecessary. Emma's hunger, her fever, the night Sarah had lain awake terrified they wouldn't survive until morning. None of it had to happen. What do I do now? She asked quietly. Robert smiled. Now, Ms. Thompson, you take back your power. You find your children. You build the life your father wanted you to have. But first, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a credit card. First, you and Emma get out of this place and into somewhere safe and warm. Sarah stared at the card. Such a small piece of plastic, but it represented freedom, security, the power to protect her daughter, the power to find Grace and David, the power to make Patricia and her family pay for what they had done. There's something else, Robert said, his tone growing more serious. Your father's instructions included a specific clause about protecting you and your children from people who might try to exploit or harm you. If anyone has threatened you, taken from you, or caused you suffering, you have the resources to address that comprehensively. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, but it wasn't fear this time. It was anticipation. They have no idea, do they? She said quietly. Patricia and her family. They think I'm still that broken woman they threw out into the rain. No, Robert confirmed. They have no idea what's coming for them. Sarah kissed Emma's forehead and looked around the shed that had been their prison for 2 months. Good, she said, her voice steady for the first time in months. Let them keep thinking that. Let them keep believing they won. She looked at Robert with eyes that were no longer desperate, no longer begging. How quickly can we move on this? As quickly as you want. Your accounts are already active. Your legal team is already assembled. Your father made sure that when this day came, you'd have everything you needed to take control of your life immediately. Sarah stood up, holding Emma close, and walked to the door of the shed. She looked out at the rain that had been her constant companion for so long, but today it looked different. Today it looked like it was washing the old world away to make room for something new. Mr. Chun, she said without turning around, I want my children back. I want justice for what was done to us, and I want to make sure no other woman ever suffers what I've suffered. Consider it done." As Sarah turned to face him, Robert saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Something powerful and unbreakable. Something that would have made her father very proud. The broken woman who had been thrown out into the storm was gone. In her place stood someone new. Someone dangerous. Someone who had learned exactly what she was capable of surviving. And Patricia's family was about to learn that the woman they had tried to destroy was far more powerful than they had ever imagined. You don't want to miss what happens next. Subscribe right now. It's free, but make sure you see how the story of Betrayal turns into one of the sweetest revenges ever witnessed. Because what Sarah does with her newfound power will shock you. The family that threw her out into the rain has no idea what storm is about to hit them. Don't just watch this transformation. Be part of it. Subscribe, because the next chapters will show you exactly what happens when someone who has lost everything discovers they actually have everything they need to rebuild the world exactly how they want it. Sarah's real story is just beginning. 6 months later, Sarah Morrison Thompson stood in the marble foyer of her new estate, watching Emma take her first steps across Italian tiles that cost more than most people's cars. The baby's delighted laughter echoed through rooms that could have housed a dozen families, but the sound that mattered most to Sarah was still missing. The voices of Grace and David, but not for much longer. The transformation had been swift and decisive. Within 24 hours of meeting Robertson, Sarah had moved from the broken shed to the penthouse suite of the city's most exclusive hotel. Within a week, she'd purchased a mansion that made Patricia's old family home look like a garden shed. Within a month, she'd assembled a legal team that struck fear into the hearts of corrupt politicians and corporate giants. But Sarah's real focus had been singular: finding her stolen children. The private investigators she'd hired were the best money could buy, former FBI agents, international specialists, people who found the unfindable. It had taken them 3 months to track down Grace and David, but when they did, Sarah's heart nearly stopped. Patricia had placed them with different families, telling each that the children were orphans from a distant relative. Grace was with Patricia's cousin in another state, living as Grace Thompson in a home that barely met minimum standards. David was even farther away, with Patricia's sister-in-law, who had always wanted a son but treated him more like a pet than a child. The legal battle to reclaim them had been vicious but brief. Patricia's family had no legal right to take the children, and when faced with Sarah's team of lawyers, their defenses crumbled like sandcastles in a hurricane. The reunion had taken place in Robert's office, neutral ground where Grace and David could be safely returned to their mother. Sarah would never forget the moment her other 2 children walked through that door. Grace, now walking and babbling, running straight into her arms as if no time had passed at all. David, shy at first, then melting into her embrace with tears that matched her own. "Mama," Grace had whispered, the words Sarah had feared she might never hear again. But even as Sarah rebuilt her family, she was building something else. An empire that would ensure no woman would ever suffer what she had suffered. The Sarah Morrison Foundation became operational within 4 months of her revelation. Its mission was simple but revolutionary: to provide emergency housing, legal aid, and financial support to women and children abandoned by their families or communities. The Foundation's first shelter opened in the same neighborhood where Sarah had lived in that broken shed, serving as a beacon of hope for those the world had forgotten. Sarah threw herself into the work with the passion of someone who understood every detail of desperation. She interviewed every woman who came through their doors, listened to every story, and ensured that no one left without the tools they needed to rebuild their lives. But she also had another project, one more personal and far more satisfying. Patricia's family had been watching Sarah's rise with growing alarm. At first, they dismissed the rumors. Sarah Thompson rich? That's impossible. We threw her out with nothing. But as the months passed, the evidence became undeniable. Sarah's picture appeared in the business section of the newspaper, identified as philanthropist and heiress Sarah Morrison Thompson. Her foundation made headlines. Her name appeared on the donor lists of major charities. Patricia called an emergency family meeting at Linda's house, the same house where they planned Sarah's exile months earlier. "It has to be some kind of mistake," Rebecca insisted, pacing nervously around the living room. She was living in a shed. I saw her myself, begging for scraps. "Maybe she married someone rich," Linda suggested weakly. Patricia's laugh was bitter. "She's using our name. Thompson. She's pretending to be Michael's widow, to con people into believing she's wealthy." But even as she spoke, Patricia felt a cold dread settling in her stomach. She remembered Sarah's father, James Morrison. He'd always been quiet at family gatherings, polite but distant. What if there had been more to him than anyone knew? The truth hit them like a freight train 3 days later, when their own lawyer called with devastating news. Mrs. Patricia Thompson? I'm calling about the wrongful custody case. Sarah Morrison Thompson's legal team has filed suit against you and your family for kidnapping, fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Patricia's phone nearly slipped from her trembling hands. That's ridiculous. Those children are Thompsons. We were protecting them. Ma'am, I've reviewed the case. Mrs. Thompson has documented evidence of every action your family took, including witness statements and recorded conversations. Her legal team is formidable. I strongly advise you to consider settlement. Settlement? For what? They're seeking $50 million in damages. The phone line went silent, except for Patricia's labored breathing. $50 million, she whispered. Mrs. Thompson, I need you to understand something. Sarah Morrison Thompson is worth nearly $500 million. She has unlimited resources, unlimited time, and frankly, unlimited motivation to pursue this case. My professional recommendation is that you settle quickly and quietly. But Patricia's pride wouldn't let her surrender so easily. She hung up and immediately called Linda and Rebecca. Within an hour, they were huddled in Linda's kitchen, their voices hushed and desperate. We can't let her destroy us, Patricia hissed. Everything we did was for the good of those children. We can't let her twist it into something criminal. But Mom, Linda said nervously, if she really has that much money... Money can't buy everything, Patricia snapped. We know this town. We have friends, connections. She might be rich now, but she's still the same cursed woman who brought death to our Michael. Rebecca nodded eagerly. That's right. People remember what happened. They remember the whispers, the bad luck that followed her. Rich or not, she still marked. It was exactly the kind of thinking that would prove to be their final mistake. 2 weeks later, Patricia received an invitation that made her blood run cold. Sarah Morrison Thompson was hosting a charity gala at the Grand Ballroom of the Riverside Hotel, the same hotel where Michael and Sarah had held their wedding reception. The invitation was addressed to the Thompson family and included a handwritten note. I thought it was time we had a proper reunion. Patricia stared at the elegant cardstock, her hands shaking with rage and fear. She's mocking us. She's actually mocking us. But she couldn't ignore it. The gala was being covered by every media outlet in the state. Anyone who was anyone would be there. To refuse the invitation would look like cowardice. The night of the gala, Patricia dressed in her finest black dress, the same one she'd worn to Michael's funeral. Linda and Rebecca flanked her as they walked into the hotel, their chins raised defiantly despite the whispers that followed them. The ballroom was transformed into something out of a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in silk and adorned with flowers that cost more than Patricia's monthly salary. The city's elite moved through the space like graceful swans, their jewelry catching the light, their laughter musical and refined. And at the center of it all stood Sarah. Patricia barely recognized her. Gone was the broken, desperate woman they'd thrown into the rain. In her place stood someone radiant, confident, powerful. Sarah wore a midnight blue gown that probably cost more than Patricia's car, her hair styled in elegant waves, her smile warm and genuine as she moved through the crowd. But it was her eyes that stopped Patricia cold. When Sarah's gaze found hers across the ballroom, there was no anger, no hatred. There was something far more terrifying, complete calm. Sarah excused herself from her conversation and walked directly toward them, her heels clicking confidently on the marble floor. The crowd seemed to part before her, like she was royalty. "Patricia," Sarah said warmly when she reached them, extending her hand as if greeting an old friend. "Linda, Rebecca, I'm so glad you could make it." Patricia stared at the offered hand but didn't take it. "What do you want, Sarah?" Sarah's smile never wavered. "I want to thank you." The words hit Patricia like a slap. "Thank us?" "Of course. You taught me something invaluable that night you threw me and Emma out into the storm." Sarah's voice was conversational, but it carried clearly to the people nearby who had begun to listen with interest. "You taught me exactly who I could count on when things got difficult." Patricia felt heat rising in her cheeks as she realized people were staring. "We don't have to do this here." "Oh, but I think we do," Sarah said, her voice still pleasant but now carrying an edge that made Patricia's skin crawl. "You see, I've been thinking a lot about that night, about how you looked at my newborn children and decided they were cursed, about how you dragged a grieving mother and her babies out into a storm. about how you stole two of my children and gave them away like unwanted puppets. The conversations around them had stopped entirely now. Patricia could feel dozens of eyes boring into her, judging her. That's not what happened, Patricia said desperately. We were trying to help. Help. Sarah's laugh was soft but deadly. Is that what you call it when you tell an entire town that a woman is cursed? When you make sure every door is closed to her, every hand turned against her, when you watch her sell her wedding ring for baby formula while you sleep in warm beds? Linda stepped forward, her face flushed with embarrassment. Sarah, please. We made mistakes, but... Mistakes, Sarah repeated thoughtfully. Is that what we're calling felony kidnapping now? Interesting. Rebecca grabbed Patricia's arm. Mom, let's go. But Sarah stepped closer, and Patricia found herself frozen by the power in those eyes. Do you know what the hardest part was, Patricia? It wasn't the cold or the hunger or even losing my home. It was lying in that broken shed, holding my sick baby, wondering if I was going to fail her the way everyone told me I would, wondering if maybe you were right. Maybe I was cursed. Maybe I didn't deserve to be a mother. Patricia's mouth opened, but no words came out. But then I realized something beautiful, Sarah continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I wasn't cursed at all. I was being prepared. Every moment of suffering you put me through was making me stronger, more determined, more capable of protecting not just my children, but every woman who might face what I face. Sarah gestured to the elegant ballroom around them. This gala has raised $3 million tonight, money that will go directly to helping women and children abandoned by their families, women thrown out into storms by people who should have protected them. The crowd began to applaud, the sound building until it filled the ballroom. Patricia felt like she was drowning in the approval Sarah commanded, the respect and admiration she'd somehow earned despite, or perhaps because of everything that had been done to her. So, thank you, Sarah said, raising her voice so everyone could hear. Thank you for showing me exactly what kind of person I never want to be. Thank you for teaching me that strength isn't about having power over others. It's about using whatever power you have to lift others up. The applause grew louder. Patricia looked around desperately and saw nothing but condemning stares, whispered conversations, the social death she feared most. Sarah leaned closer. Her voice now meant only for Patricia's ears. Oh, and Patricia, the lawsuit is just the beginning. I have enough money to tie you up in court for the rest of your life. I have enough influence to make sure everyone knows exactly what you did to me and my children. And I have enough time to make sure you experience every moment of powerlessness you put me through. Patricia's face went white. You're threatening us. I'm promising you, Sarah replied calmly. You want to destroy me because you thought I was weak. Now you get to find out what happens when someone you try to break discovers she was unbreakable all along. Sarah stepped back and smiled brightly. But enough about the past. This is a celebration. After all, I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening. As Sarah walked away, returning to her guests who welcomed her back with warm smiles and congratulations on the evening's success, Patricia stood frozen in the middle of the ballroom. People were staring, whispering, some even pointing. Linda tugged at her arm. Mom, we need to leave. Now! But as they made their humiliating exit, Patricia caught a glimpse of something that made her heart stop entirely. In the corner of the ballroom, Emma was playing in an elegant playpen while Grace and David sat nearby in matching outfits, healthy and happy and beautiful. All three children were laughing, surrounded by people who clearly adored them. They looked nothing like the cursed, unwanted burdens Patricia had convinced herself they were. They looked like exactly what they were, beloved, protected, cherished children whose mother had moved heaven and earth to keep them safe. As the elevator doors closed on Patricia's shocked face, Sarah watched from across the ballroom and smiled, not with cruelty or satisfaction, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned that the best revenge was not destruction, but demonstration. She had demonstrated exactly what happened when someone tried to break an unbreakable spirit. She had shown the world the difference between power used to harm and power used to heal. And she was just getting started. If you're still watching without subscribing, ask yourself why. It's free. This woman rose from betrayal like a phoenix, rising from ashes. And if you don't subscribe, it's almost like you're siding with the people who threw her out into that storm. Don't let that be you. Subscribe right now because the final act of the story will show you exactly how Sarah uses her incredible power not just to get revenge, but to make sure no other woman ever suffers what she suffered. You won't want to miss the legacy she builds in the final confrontation that changes everything forever. 2 years after the charity gala that destroyed Patricia's reputation, Sarah stood before a crowd of 5,000 people at the opening of the Morrison Family Center for Women and Children. The massive complex sprawled across 10 acres, featuring emergency housing, child care facilities, job training centers, legal aid offices, and medical clinics, all free of charge to any woman in need. Emma, now a confident 3-year-old, held her mother's hand while Grace and David, sturdy toddlers with bright, curious eyes, played at their feet. The children had no memory of those dark months when they were separated, but Sarah would never forget every brick of this building, every program they offered, every woman they helped. It all stemmed from those nights in Broken Shed when Sarah had sworn that no mother would ever face what she had faced. 2 years ago, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the outdoor speakers, I was living in a storage shed with my infant daughter, watching her grow weaker from hunger while the world turned its back on us. Today, we open a facility that will ensure no woman in our state ever has to choose between shelter and dignity. The crowd erupted in applause, but Sarah's eyes found a small group standing at the very back, trying to remain invisible. Patricia, Linda, and Rebecca had come, drawn perhaps by morbid curiosity or the desperate hope that time had dimmed Sarah's resolve. It hadn't. The legal battle had been swift and decisive. Patricia's family had tried to fight the lawsuit at first, hiring lawyers they couldn't afford, and making claims that crumbled under scrutiny. When the evidence of their actions was presented in court, witness statements, recorded conversations, documentation of their systematic campaign to isolate Sarah, even their own attorney had advised immediate settlement. The $50 million judgment had been devastating, but not surprising. What had shocked them was what Sarah did with the money. Every penny had gone into the foundation. I could have kept that money, Sarah had told the judge during the sentencing phase. I could have used it for personal revenge, to destroy the people who hurt my family. But that would make me exactly like them. Instead, I'm using their cruelty to fuel something beautiful. Their hatred will become housing. Their rejection will become acceptance. Their abandonment will become rescue. The judge had called it the most powerful statement about justice and mercy he had heard in 30 years on the bench. But Sarah's real triumph wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the letters that arrived daily at her foundation from women whose lives had been saved by the program Sarah created. Maria, who had fled an abusive marriage with her 4 children and found not just shelter at the Morrison Center, but job training that led to a career in nursing. Jennifer, whose family had disowned her for leaving an arranged marriage, who now ran her own business thanks to the Foundation's entrepreneurship program. Lakeisha, who had aged out of foster care at 18 with nowhere to go, who was now in her 2nd year of college on a Morrison Foundation scholarship. Hundreds of women, thousands of children, all living proof that Sarah's suffering had been transformed into something magnificent. The Foundation's success had brought Sarah national attention. She'd appeared on talk shows, been featured on magazine covers, spoken at conferences around the world. But she always brought the conversation back to the same point, that society's throwaways often become its greatest treasures if someone is willing to see their worth. During one particularly memorable television interview, the host had asked her about forgiveness. Sarah, you created this incredible legacy of helping others, but have you forgiven the people who hurt you? Sarah had been quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. Forgiveness isn't about them, she had finally said. It's about me choosing not to carry their poison in my heart. But forgiveness doesn't mean there are no consequences. It means I can deliver those consequences from a place of justice rather than vengeance. And what consequences have there been? Sarah's smile had been serene but steel-edged. They wanted to make me invisible, so now they get to watch me shine brighter than they ever imagined possible. They wanted to silence me, so now they get to hear my voice amplified across the world, telling my story and inspiring others. They wanted to destroy my family, so now they get to watch my children grow up loved, protected, and proud of who they are. She had paused, her eyes finding the camera directly. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply living well and helping others do the same. Now, standing before the Morrison Family Center, Sarah felt the weight of that truth. In the crowd, she could see some of the women her foundation had helped, their children playing together, their faces bright with hope and possibility. She could see community leaders, politicians, business owners, people who had once shunned her now competing to be associated with her success. But most importantly, she could see Patricia, Linda, and Rebecca at the back of the crowd, their faces etched with something Sarah recognized as her own expression from those terrible months, the look of people who had lost everything that mattered. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed and families toured the new facility, Sarah wasn't surprised when Patricia approached her. The older woman looked like she'd aged a decade in 2 years. Her hair was gray, her clothes worn, her eyes hollow with the kind of desperation Sarah remembered all too well. "Sarah," Patricia said quietly, could we talk?" Sarah nodded and led her to a quiet corner of the garden behind the main building. Emma stayed close to her mother's side, while Grace and David played on the nearby playground equipment, their laughter a bright counterpoint to the tension between the two women. "I wanted to say," Patricia began, then stopped, swallowing hard. "I wanted to say I'm sorry." Sarah waited, saying nothing. "We lost everything," Patricia continued, her voice breaking. "The house, the business, our standing in the community. Rebecca's husband left her. Linda can't find work anywhere in town. People cross the street when they see us coming." Sarah's expression remained neutral. And I know we deserve it. I know what we did was wrong. But I also know you have the power to help us, to give us a second chance. You've helped so many others." Patricia's words trailed off as she saw the look in Sarah's eyes. "You're right," Sarah said calmly. "I do help others. I help women who have been abandoned by their families. I help mothers who have been thrown out into storms. I help people who have been judged and found wanting by those who should have protected them." Patricia's face crumpled with hope. "But you know what I don't help?" Sarah continued. "I don't help the people who create the storms. I don't help the ones who do the abandoning. I don't help the ones who look at innocent children and call them curse." The hope died in Patricia's eyes. "However," Sarah said, reaching into her purse, "I do want to give you something." She handed Patricia a small card. It was a business card for a legal aid office in the next state over. "They help people who are facing financial ruin," Sarah explained. "They work with families who are struggling to rebuild their lives after making terrible mistakes. They don't know who's sending you, and they won't treat you any differently than they treat any other person who walks through their doors desperate for help." Patricia stared at the card through tears. "Why?" "Because my children are watching," Sarah said simply. "And I want them to see that strength isn't about crushing your enemies. It's about being powerful enough to show mercy, even when it isn't deserved." She knelt down and picked up Emma, who had been tugging at her dress. "But Patricia," Sarah added, her voice firm, "this is the only help you'll ever get from me. Use it wisely." As Patricia walked away, clutching the card like a lifeline, Sarah felt a profound sense of completion. The circle was closed. The lesson was taught. The legacy was secure. That evening, after the children were asleep in their beautiful nursery in their secure home, Sarah stood in her father's study, a room she recreated exactly as she remembered from her childhood. His picture sat on the desk, and beside it, a framed copy of the letter he'd left her. "You were right, Dad," she whispered to the photograph. "I was never as powerless as I thought. But more than that, I was never as alone as they tried to make me believe." She looked out the window at the lights of the city, knowing that somewhere out there, women were sleeping safely in the Morrison Family Center. Children were dreaming of futures that seemed impossible just days before. Families were being rebuilt. Hopes were being restored. Lives were being transformed. Tomorrow, Sarah would wake up and continue the work. There would be more women to help, more programs to create, more lives to touch. The foundation was growing, expanding to other states, inspiring copycat organizations around the world. But tonight, she simply stood in the quiet of her father's study and marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From the broken shed to this moment, from desperation to destiny, from victim to victor. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Robertson. Saw the news coverage of the center opening. Your father would be so proud. Sarah smiled and typed back. We all would be, because that was the truth that Patricia and her family had never understood. The truth that had made all the difference in the world. Sarah had never been alone. She'd had her father's love reaching across death to sustain her. She'd had her children's need giving her strength. She'd had her own unbreakable spirit, forged in fire and proven in storm. And now she had something else, the knowledge that her suffering had not been meaningless. Every tear she cried in that shed had watered the ground where hope would grow. Every night she'd held Emma close while rain leaked through their roof, had taught her exactly how tightly to hold every woman who came to her for help. The people who had tried to destroy her had actually created something beautiful. They had taken a grieving widow and transformed her into a force of nature. They had taken a vulnerable mother and made her into a protector of the vulnerable. They had tried to write the ending to her story, but instead, they had only provided the prologue to her greatest chapter. Outside her window, the city slept peacefully, never knowing that in one quiet study, a woman who had walked through hell and emerged as an angel was planning tomorrow's miracles. The cursed woman they had thrown away had become exactly what her father always knew she could be, a blessing to the world. Her story proves that no matter how deep the betrayal, no matter how complete the abandonment, no matter how impossible the circumstances, hope can still bloom. Dreams can still come true. Broken hearts can still heal strong enough to heal others. Subscribe right now if the story has touched your heart, if it's reminded you that your current chapter is not your final chapter, if it's shown you that sometimes the people who try to break us are actually preparing us for our greatest triumphs. By subscribing, you stand with every woman who refuses to be broken. You stand with every mother who fights for her children against impossible odds. You stand with everyone who believes that love is stronger than hatred, that justice is more powerful than cruelty, and that sometimes the ones thrown away rise to become the strongest of all. Sarah's story is our story. Her triumph is our reminder. Her legacy is our inspiration. Don't just watch her victory. Be part of the movement it represents. Subscribe, share, and remember, you are never as powerless as someone else wants you to believe. And those who betray you, they live to regret it forever. But you rise. You rebuild. You become exactly who you were always meant to be, just like Sarah did.